Hi, everyone. Welcome to the free prep hour. My name is Allison Bell, and we are going to get started in just a minute. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm going to stop my screen share for just a second so I can say hello to all of you. All right, welcome everybody. So before we get started, I would love to just hear a little bit about who's in the room today. So if you wouldn't mind using the chat to introduce yourself, I'd love to hear where you're joining us from and what stage in your LSAT journey you are on. So let's go ahead and just introduce ourselves in the chat. And I see I have a note already from Tony. Hi, Tony. Thank you. All right. Welcome from the Bronx, Tony. Hi, Brenda. Welcome from New Jersey. Hi, Brittany. Welcome from Austin. Hi, Sharon. That's exciting. Taking the test for the second time this weekend. Awesome. Hi, Sabrina. Welcome from Baltimore, North Carolina. Okay, my parents live there. Great. Taking the test in June. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for sharing. So today's free prep hour should have a little bit of something for everybody, no matter what stage of your LSAT journey you are on. We are going to be talking about logical reasoning. And in particular, we're going to be talking about some of the challenges with logical reasoning in terms of pacing. And then we're going to talk about a drill that you can do to help yourself get faster at logical reasoning. And we're going to actually try that drill together. It's called a pace pusher. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Get us on the right place. Okay, so let's talk about logical reasoning. We are going to talk about three major topics in this session today, and of course do some actual practice problems together. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the logical reasoning difficulty curve, and then we're going to use that to talk about the idea of a pace pusher, which is a drill that you can do to help you work on logical reasoning. And then we're going to close out after we review our pace pusher exercise and actually try it. We're going to learn a few additional drills that we might do in logical reasoning. So one of the things that can help people get faster in logical reasoning is getting familiar with how the difficulty curve works in logical reasoning. Because we want to make sure that we're adjusting our pace for different styles of questions. So when I say the difficulty curve, what I mean is if you think about the peaks and valleys of difficulties over the course of a logical reasoning section, they are in some ways predictable. So for example, if you visualize this difficulty curve as sort of the higher it is on the curve, the more difficult the problem is as you go throughout the section. You see that when the section starts out is when the problems are at their lowest difficulty. So the first 5 problems or so tend to be a little bit easier in nature. And then there's a little bit of a bump in difficulty around problem 8 through 10. And then we get, some moderately challenging problems in the early teens. And then we get a big spike in difficulty. And that last hump that you see on the difficulty curve is about problems 15 to 23 or so. And then the last couple of problems on the section tend to be a little bit easier. And knowing this as we go into a logical reasoning section allows us to plan how we want to use our time. So for folks who are aiming for a score in the 170 plus range, your goal should be to get very high accuracy on logical reasoning. And to do that, you're likely going to need to spend a lot of time on that more difficult portion of the curve, maybe even 2 minutes a problem. What we recommend for folks who are aiming for that high accuracy is to do about 15 problems in 15 minutes. And that leaves you 20 minutes, the whole section is 35, to do the last 10 or so problems. So an average of 2 minutes per problem. But that's a pretty intense speed, 15 problems in 15 minutes. And it's something that you have to work up to. And so for folks who are training themselves to get to that pace, we recommend exercises like what we're going to do together, which is called the pace pusher. So the idea of the pace pusher is if you know you're aiming for a high logical reasoning score, you want to work towards a goal of getting the first 10 questions done in 10 minutes. Now, oftentimes when we're first starting out with logical reasoning, that might not be a reasonable goal. And so if you're just starting out with logical reasoning, it might be better to just focus on making sure you're learning the question types, doing them in about a minute and a half or less, and really getting comfortable with the process. So this is an exercise that's appropriate once you've got some logical reasoning skills under your belt and you're really ready to start drilling down on how to move faster through those logical reasoning questions. And what I would suggest doing is that you actually first start by just getting a benchmark of what is my current time when I do 10 questions. Just like when you go out and you're working on running a mile. You wouldn't start by just saying, well, let me see if I can run a 5-minute mile today. You'd go out and you'd run at your natural healthy pace, and then you time yourself and you see, okay, how fast do I do it now? And then every week you might work towards getting a little faster at running a mile. Same thing with the first 10 questions. So you might start, time yourself and see, okay, right now I take 15 minutes on the first 10 questions. Check your accuracy. If your accuracy is high, then you might say, all right, I got them all right in 15 minutes. I wonder if I could go a little bit faster and still get them all right. So maybe you take 30 seconds off and you try timing yourself with 14 and a half minutes. So the exercise that we're going to do together is actually to do the 10 questions that I'm going to present to you in 10 minutes. So I'm going to put each question up on the screen for a minute. You're going to see it and take some time to work through it. I'll let you know when there are 10 seconds left so that you can get your final answer to that question written down. And then we'll move on to the next question. This is going to feel like a challenge. And that's okay. The goal of this exercise is to learn from this experience about what are the shortcuts that we need to take to move faster on logical reasoning, but also are there any shortcuts that are maybe a bad idea to take when we're trying to move faster? So before we start this exercise, I just want to check in with everybody and see if we have any questions. So I'm going to stop my screen share for a minute and just give you a moment to send me a chat if you have any questions about the exercise that we are going to do. Can I check, were you all seeing the difficulty curve okay? I'm presenting on an iPad for the first time today, so I want to make sure that the tech's working okay. Is anyone having difficulty seeing the slides? Great, thank you, Tony, appreciate that. All right, well, in that case, what we're gonna do is, I've got a timer right here. So I'm going to put the slides back up in a second. You'll see an actual LSAT problem. All the problems that we're going to go through are from practice test 65. And I'll put each of them up for a minute. And again, it's going to feel rushed, and that's normal. So you're not doing anything wrong if you feel rushed. I apologize for putting you through this experience, but I promise we're going to learn from it. And I'll let you know when there's about 10 seconds left in that minute. And then I'm going to move it on to the next slide. So you just won't see that problem anymore. You'll be on the next problem and you'll need to reset, take a deep breath, start that next problem. We're going to do that 10 times. So I'm going to just be quiet during that time and let you all see the problems and work through them. And then I'll pop back on after the 10 minutes and we are going to review the problems together and also just talk about what that experience was like. All right, so I'm going to mute myself now and share the screen and we will get started. All right. I want to hear how that experience was for everybody. So let's use the chat. Give me one word to tell me what that was like for you. Yeah. Challenging, intense, weird, interesting, Brenda. Pressured. Yeah. Frustrating. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, Britt. Understandable though. Very fast, very fast. I'm curious if any of you found yourselves doing, yes, necessary, yeah. Some of the studying we got to do for the LSAT is definitely hard but necessary. Thank you, Sabrina. This is the kind of the question that I wanted to ask was, what did this change for you all about your process? Sabrina shared it forced her to pick an answer and move on. Did anyone else find themselves doing something a little bit differently? Thinking faster? Interesting. Oh, that's a great one, Britt. Yeah, that's really important. So Britt shared, read the question first and then read the passage. And that's a really wonderful tool for becoming more efficient at logical reasoning because the question guides what you should be thinking about or how you should be thinking and what parts of the text to focus on while you read. And so if you read the question first, then you can say, okay, my job on this is to find the flaw, or my job on this is to find the conclusion, or whatever the case may be. So that's a really great strategy move, strategy adjustment. Forcing you to read faster. Yeah. Okay. So I want to share with you some tips that that helped me move faster and that can have helped a lot of my students move faster too. Through questions like these. In addition to what y'all shared about reading faster, reading the question stem first, and thinking faster, there are also lots of patterns and LSAT knowledge that can help you get faster at these first 10 questions just through the hard work of studying. So what I'd like to do now is go back and talk you through those 10 questions. I'll share the correct answers with you as we go. But I also want to share some of the strategies that I would use in the moment on those questions to help me move more quickly through them and make it possible to answer those in a minute. So I will screen share again in just a second. And when I do, we are going to go back through all 10 of those questions. Let me just get us ready. All right. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the first question. So if I'm thinking about how to move through this question quickly, definitely going to start by taking a look at the question stem first. So this question is an example of what's called an explain a discrepancy question. So I see right away, I'm going to have to figure out how to explain something. And in particular, the thing I have to explain is this decline of something among sugar maples. So that helps me have kind of a precision focus, and glancing at the text, that word, however, jumps out at me. I'm guessing that that is where the crux of the issue that I'm going to need to explain will be. Now, I will tell you that one place when I need to rush, the place that I do not rush is in reading the stimulus. Even when I'm trying to do these questions in a minute or less, reading the stimulus is critical. I need to have very strong comprehension. And I end up actually being less efficient if I read so fast that I don't process the information, because then I have to go back and double check things and I get confused as I'm working through the answer choices. So I recommend picking up speed in other ways that we'll talk about. But that particular way of reading like so fast that you just don't even understand is a way that I would personally find really challenging to do. So when I read this, I get some context about this, what acid rain does to the calcium in soil. All these different types of trees need the calcium to survive. And then I see that, however, okay, so this is setting me up for the confusing discrepancy. Sugar maples that experience acid rain show more of this calcium decline than spruces or firs. Okay, so the goal that I'm looking for is, why do sugar maples show more decline than spruces or firs? So what I'm anticipating is that my correct answer is going to offer some kind of contrast between sugar maples and spruces and firs that helps me to differentiate why this would impact sugar maples more. And because of that, my brain is kind of gonna focus on answer choices that do present some sort of contrast. So scanning these answer choices, an answer like A that doesn't actually name any of the species of trees, I'm gonna scan over that real quickly. That doesn't mean that I'm sure that it's wrong, but knowing that these first 5 questions tend to be lower in difficulty, I'm not expecting that I'm going to have a really outside of the box, unexpected answer. So I'm going to move past A and defer. If I don't find something that I like better, I'll come back to it. I noticed that B does draw a contrast between sugar maples, spruces, and firs. And so I'm going to hold on to it for a moment. I noticed that C does as well. D, I'm going to cross off immediately because I don't see the distinction being drawn, and I do see it in E as well. So I'm going to go back for one more pass. That's going to be pretty quick, deeper dive into these. I notice in B, my eyes are really drawn to the part that says deteriorate less rapidly. And the reason that my eyes are drawn to that is because oftentimes a characteristic of wrong answers on the LSAT is that they make irrelevant comparisons. So when I see words like more or less or better or worse, my attention goes there in an answer choice because I want to say, well, was that a relevant comparison? In this case, we aren't concerned with how fast these trees deteriorate. We're concerned with just kind of whether they show the type of deterioration that would be consistent with calcium deficiency. So I'm going to use that to cross off B. C mentions whether or not they can extract calcium from a mineral compound common in soil and not affected by acid rain. Ooh, so this seems relevant because this would help to explain why the spruces and firs do okay, but the sugar maples do not. Maybe they can get their calcium somewhere else. Answer choice E is a great trap answer if you're moving a little bit too fast. Answer choice E is something that flags, a little flag goes off in my head where I say, oh, that would matter if we didn't already make it clear that we're comparing trees that all receive a lot of acid rain. When I check the text, though, we're talking about these trees in forests that receive significant acid rain. So there might be a lot of trees that don't or that do from these different species, but all this text is about is comparing all of the different species of trees that receive a lot of acid rain in their forests. So the correct answer to this one is C. And a couple of takeaways to keep in mind are if you've got a sort of a contrast that needs explaining in these types of questions, then you want to hone in on answer choices that touch both sides of the contrast. So in this case, all the different species of trees. And also, we're going to see this throughout this problem set to watch out for those irrelevant comparisons, like how quickly does it deteriorate, and really use those keywords like less, more, better, and worse to help draw your attention to those so you can evaluate them. All right, I'm going to stop my share for a second and just give y'all an opportunity to ask questions. So let's check in. Any questions on that problem? All right. If not, let's take a look at the second problem and see what we can learn from that. All right. So our second problem, when we look at it, is a necessary assumption question. And we see that in the question stem. So this is a great example of a question type that you want to have memorized the different formats in which you might see this question presented. So a necessary assumption question is a question type that will ask you for something that has to be true in order for the argument to hold. And one great thing to do as you're studying, whether you're just starting out or you're in the late stages of reviewing, is to learn the different ways that question will show up. So it might use the word required, like it does here. It might use the word necessary. It also will frequently say the language of depends on. So what is an assumption this argument depends on? So one thing that I recommend for students is making flashcards with those different question stems, not only for necessary assumptions, but for all the different question types, so that when you see this, one of the things that is really fast for you is that your brain automatically says, this is a necessary assumption. I know that I don't have to think about it at all. You also want your brain to know what to do with that information right away. So you want to have memorized for each different question type the main process that you want to use and anything that is a particular process or trick or trap for that question type. So when I see a necessary assumption question, it falls in this bucket of questions that we call the assumption family, where I want to be looking for the premise and the conclusion and find the gap between them. So just recognizing that question stem automatically affects the way that I'm going to think as I read this. So I glance at this paragraph. Once again, looking at the stimulus, I notice the word however. So however is a pretty critical word in logical reasoning. And for this question type, it often lets me know that this is where we're going to see a pivot into the author's opinion, their premise and conclusion. So as I read, I notice the first sentence gives me some background information. I don't want to skip it for the sake of time because I need to understand what's going on here. And we find out that these syndicated political columnists often fail to persuade voters. And we're given a reason why, that by the time the column appears, nearly everyone who will vote has already made up their mind. So our conclusion is these syndicated political columnists tend to fail, or their efforts to persuade voters rarely succeed. And the reason is that pretty much everybody's already made up their mind by the time they see the column. This is a classic example of one of those LSAT arguments that I read and I'm like, yeah, this argument seems logical, like that seems right? If everybody's made up their minds, then you're not going to be able to persuade voters. And sometimes it's difficult to know going into the answer choices what the gap is in the argument. So what I want to do here is just make sure I'm really clear on my goal. So I'm looking for a reason, a sort of a gap between this idea that everybody's already made up their mind. And so these columnists cannot change anyone's mind. They can't persuade anyone to vote a certain way. So I'm looking for an assumption that addresses sort of the persuadability of these voters who have made up their mind. And so I'm going to start looking through the answer choices and see what I can rule out quickly. So answer choice A, they influence the votes of most of their readers who have not yet decided which candidate to vote for. So this seems a little bit out of scope because we've been told that nearly everyone who is going to vote has already made up their mind. So I would rule that out right away. Answer choice B, that these attempts can actually cause people to vote a different way. This one I can rule out right away as well. So this argument, this is a little bit too strong for what I'm looking for. I want an assumption that supports the idea that these columnists are not going to succeed in persuading voters, but this is going even further and saying they actually, straight up cause them to vote a different way. That doesn't have to be true for this argument to hold. And as long as I'm focused on necessary assumptions, I'm going to rule this one out. Answer choice C, people who regularly read columns by syndicated political columnists mainly read those by columnists with whom they largely agree. Okay, this seems reasonable in the sense that, if you already agree, you're probably not going to change anybody's mind. So I might hold on to that one for a minute. Regular readers of columns are less likely to be persuaded to vote a certain way than are people who seldom read such columns. So this argument, this is another one of those irrelevant comparisons. I see that less likely, like I saw in the last problem. So I'm like, okay, do we care about regular readers versus people who seldom read these columns? Not really. It's not really addressed in this argument. So I would cross that off for another irrelevant comparison. And then people rarely can be persuaded to change their minds about which candidate to vote for once they've made a decision. Ooh, that seems relevant. That's kind of that hidden assumption that I didn't notice at first, but it is possible for people to change their minds after they think they've made them up. And if that were to happen, then these syndicated political columnists would actually succeed. So there's a tool that I have for necessary assumption questions called the negation test. And the way that I think about it is if I were to negate this answer choice, would the argument fall apart? That would show me that this answer truly needs to be true for this argument to work. And if I were to negate E, it would say people can be persuaded to change their mind, which would really challenge the conclusion of this argument. So because answer choice E passes the negation test, I'm going to go ahead and select it. I'll revisit C because I know that we had kept that one in contention. So answer choice C, if I were to negate it, it would say people who read columns by these political columnists do not mainly read columnists by people with whom they largely agree. Negating it doesn't really change whether the conclusion is true or not. So I see that it's not as powerful of an answer as E. So a couple of takeaways from this one. You want to be able to quickly recognize all question types, including all the different forms of a necessary assumption question. You want to know how to find the premise and conclusion and familiarize yourself with some of those patterns, like however, as a pivot into the premise and conclusion. And again, we see irrelevant comparisons coming up in answer choices that make them a little bit easier to eliminate. Let me pause here for a moment and I'm going to just see if we have any questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Anything that's been coming up for you so far about either of these questions in particular or LR in general. Got caught in the trap answer. Yeah, it happens. Good thing to learn from. All right, let's take a look at the next question then. Okay, so our next question is an example of a weekend question. And so for this question, I want to again be looking for the premise and the conclusion. I see again a but, so similar to the however from before, I'm thinking that I'm going to see the premise and conclusion towards the end of the argument. So I get a little bit of background information that these airlines are increasing elbow and leg room because business travelers value that. And then we start, looks like we're venturing into conclusion territory, saying that the travel industry consultant believes these airlines are actually over concerned about comfort. They should focus on the comfort of the leisure travelers, not the business travelers, because those people buy the vast majority of the airline tickets. All right, so once again, it's kind of hard to anticipate what exactly is going to be a way to weaken this argument. So instead, I just want to make sure I'm in the right frame of mind. So I want to have the right goal. So I've got my conclusion really clear here. They're saying focus on the leisure travelers. They buy most of the tickets. So I'm looking for something that would give me a reason to challenge that, which would be, I'm looking for something to give me a reason to focus on the business travelers and not the leisure travelers. So I'm gonna look for something, this is kind of a similar mindset to the first problem. I need something that gives me a push towards business travelers and differentiates them from leisure travelers. So I'm kind of looking for an answer choice that has both of those components in them, some sort of contrast. And just scanning the answers quickly, I noticed the only one that does is answer choice D. Answer choice A mentions business travelers. Answer choices B and C, or answer choice B doesn't mention either. C just mentions leisure travelers, and E just mentions leisure travelers. But D is actually the correct answer. And it does make a comparison. So it tells us, hey, actually, even though leisure travelers are buying more tickets, business travelers are spending more money and contributing more to the revenue. So that gives us a reason to focus on business travelers. So you'll notice there that I really didn't pay a ton of attention to the answer choices. And this is a judgment call. So as you get to know the LSAT better, sometimes on these early questions, especially the first 5, you might be able to anticipate the answer well enough or know what you're looking for well enough that you can kind of skim, and when you'll see the correct answer when you know it, or you can read the answers until you find the right answer. So you might find the right answer at C and say, yep, that's definitely it, and stop there and pick it to save time. Now, that is not a strategy that you want to use on all portions of the test, because if you do that same thing in the 15 to 23 section of the test, there are going to be a bazillion trap answers to grab you that are going to look really appealing, and you won't be able to trust your gut as much. But for a problem like this one that's earlier on in the section, if you had a good hunch about this and you saw an answer choice that matched it, you might be able to go with your gut a little bit more than you would say later on in the test. Now, everybody's different, right? And so this problem might have matched my gut instinct, but it might not have matched your gut instinct. And that makes total sense because we all bring different background knowledge and comfort levels with different material and ways of thinking to the test. So it's not to say that everyone should have that experience on this particular problem, but when you do have a problem where you feel like you really know, okay, I can identify what's wrong with this argument, I know what I should see in the correct answer. If you're on the first 5 problems, you might be safe to just grab the answer when you see it rather than doing a really systematic process of elimination. All right. let me know. I'll stop for a second and just see if we have any questions on that one. Any questions there? Tony, what do you mean by that? Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Tony. So one thing that you may get out of this exercise, even it feels, fast and intense, but Tony's sharing, some thoughts on what aspects of LR are more difficult. And that's a really valuable thing to reflect on. So when you do an exercise like this, where you go through 10 problems and they're sort of a variety pack of problems, it definitely can bring to light what areas of the LR section are clicking for you and making sense, and where are the areas that are more challenging. And so that's awesome self-reflection. There are a lot of resources out there to support you with the assumption family, or for other folks, if there are other aspects of the LR section that are challenging for you. One thing that I'll suggest is we have a lot of free prep hour videos available on YouTube. And we've done several, myself and other instructors have done several on the assumption family, sort of on the assumption family generally, but also on specific question types. So you can find some on necessary and sufficient assumptions, strengthen and weaken problems. So I would encourage you to check those out to see some more deep dive instruction on the assumption family that gets a little bit more into it than what we're doing here together today. And same if there are other question types out there for the rest of you that are giving you trouble, definitely check out our YouTube channel to find some more deep instruction on different question types in logical reasoning in particular. All right, I wanna maybe, awesome, good to hear, Tony. I wanna go over one or two more questions. So let's get back to it. All right, so let's take a look at this fourth problem. I love these problems because they just remind me of real life arguments. So this is an example of an identify the disagreement problem. And this is a great one to anticipate an answer before you get in the answer choices. So our job on an identify the disagreement question is to basically read the first person's argument and then figure out where the second person sort of latches on to the first person. Which part of their original argument does that person specifically attack directly? And we can often have a pretty good idea of where that is before we look at the answer choices so that we can move more quickly through those answers. So let's take a look at this. So we've got Gabby saying children should be allowed to follow their own interests, supported by experienced teachers who offer minimal guidance. This allows them to be most successful. So Logan starts with this big statement of I disagree. So Logan could disagree about anything. We're going to try to figure out what exactly did Gabby say that Logan disagreed with. Children should acquire the fundamental knowledge necessary for future success. Okay, so if I kind of compare that to what Gabby said, that doesn't really directly contrast to anything Gabby said. Like that could still be possible while they're following their own interests. So I don't see the clash yet. They learn such fundamentals only as a strong word, only as a good place to harvest disagreement, only through disciplined, systematic instruction from accredited teachers. Okay, so this disciplined, systematic instruction kind of seems to be a contrast between the teachers offer minimal guidance and the children are allowed to fully explore their own interests. So I'm seeing some difference there. I see they use the word accredited to describe teachers, but I don't necessarily see that experienced and accredited are mutually exclusive. A teacher could be both. So I think the area that's most ripe for disagreement between the two is this idea of should children explore their own interests and the teachers don't guide them very much, or the teachers have this sort of systematic, disciplined way of presenting knowledge. So that's what I'm looking for in my answer choices. And as I scan through the answers, the one that jumps out at me here and the correct answer is answer choice B. This idea of how much should the teacher direct the children's education is a good match for my pre-phrase of how much guidance do they have. I can quickly eliminate some of the other answers just by a quick scan. So C addresses the qualified. I already identified that the qualifications aren't super different between the two. D brings in creativity, which isn't really addressed by either of them. A and E are a bit closer to what we've got. The extent to which school children are interested, though, isn't something that either of them talks about. So it's certainly possible, according to both of them, that kids could be interested in fundamental academic subjects. And we also aren't disagreeing about the best way to acquire fundamental knowledge, but really whether that is the thing that should be the main focus of school at all. So correct answer here is B. And a takeaway from this one more broadly, even than this question type in particular, is that there are some questions on the logical reasoning section that are very pre-phrasable. And one of the things that can help you move more quickly through the section is to know which question types should you be able to predict and answer versus which ones are unpredictable. That way, on the question types where you can predict an answer, you go ahead and you make your prediction, and then you can know it when you see it and be able to grab it more quickly and spend less time on process of elimination. Versus question types where the answers are less predictable, then you might be more cautious walking through the answer choices, spend less time up front trying to predict and more time focused on your answer choice analysis. So you're shifting your time to a different priority. Yes, B is correct for number 4. Yeah, let me know if that raises a question for you. There's something that I can go over to help with number 4 again. Okay. Let's go over another one together. All right. So number 5 is an example of another question type that's got high predictability. So this is a principal support question. So we're looking for a bridge between the premise and the conclusion on questions like this. And these question types are often very formulaic in the sense that they'll basically just say, if the premise is true, then the conclusion is true. This particular example ends up getting a little bit more complicated, but when you're making your list of what's predictable and what's not predictable, generally speaking, principal support questions should be on the predictable side. So we've got this judge, and let's take a look at the argument that we're given. So we get a lot of background information. We've got a plaintiff, we've got co-defendants. The plaintiff wants to question each defendant without their co-defendants or their co-defendants' legal counsel being present, but some of them share the same legal counsel, and the court doesn't want to order anyone to find new legal counsel, so the order cannot be granted. Okay, so we're looking for, what is the missing gap here? What has this argument not addressed that would make it so that this is just totally impossible? So is there something, some sort of rule that would make it so that this is just like absolutely not possible? And one way to think about this is, well, okay, so what are the options that have already been considered? So the plaintiff wants to not have the co-defendant or their legal counsel present, but they have the same legal counsel. They're not going to get new legal counsel. So the only other option that's still on the table is, well, what if they just didn't have the legal counsel present at all? And that ends up being the direction that the correct answer goes. So for this one, the correct answer is B. Defendants have the right to have their legal counsel present when being questioned, because this answer, if it's true, sort of bridges the gap to, okay, that's why like the plaintiff's request absolutely cannot be granted, because they can't just not have their legal counsel present. I want to talk through the incorrect answers here. I think this question is kind of challenging, so let's take a look at those. So a court cannot issue an order that forces legal counsel to disclose information revealed by a client. We're not really talking about disclosing information, so I would cross that one off. C, I see self-incriminating questions. I would cross that off right away. We aren't going there in this argument, that's out of scope. D, I might hang on to for a minute. A plaintiff in a legal case should never be granted a right that is denied to a defendant, just because it's talking about rights and plaintiffs and defendants. But this isn't talking about sort of like the plaintiff has this right that the defendant does not have. It's talking about, you know, they're in different circumstances where the defendants are the only people who share the legal counsel. So it's a little bit different. And then the defendant's legal counsel has the right to question the plaintiff, is kind of flipping this situation where we're not concerned about questioning the plaintiff, but how can we make it possible for the plaintiff to question each defendant? So to reiterate, correct answer here is B. These are generally pretty predictable, although this one in particular was a little bit of a curveball. All right, before we wrap up today's session, I want to share the answers to the remaining questions, and then if you'd like to go explore them further, they're available in LSAT Prep Test 65, Section 4. So the answer to number 6 was E. The answer to number 7 was A. The answer to number 8 was C. The answer to number 9 was E. And the answer to number 10 was D. This video will also be posted on YouTube within a few weeks. So if you want to try this exercise again with the pause button handy so you can have more time and then continue reviewing the other half of those questions, you're certainly welcome to. Before we wrap up, I just want to share a few more options for free LSAT prep. So one of the things that we offer is the ability to try out one of our classes for free. So you can come to session 1 of any of our 10 class courses to get an introduction to logical reasoning and logic games. It's a 3-hour class, so it's a great experience, a lot of information to be learned there. We also have an LSAT Interact asynchronous video-based course that you can sample on our website. All right, with that, I want to thank you all for coming and spending your evening with me. And wish you the best of luck in your studies. And I hope to see you at another free prep hour soon. Take care, everybody.